Hello, hello, hello there, Harp family. How are you? I hope you are well. And welcome back to another Let's Harp About It. Today, I have the one and only Miss Josie Caballero. Okay, I'm so excited. I'm so excited. If you guys know her family, okay, you know what it is, okay? But it's like, I need no introduction, okay? First and foremost. But before we get into that discussion, okay, take like a quick 5 seconds or so, share, like all that good stuff. Let somebody know, okay, that is popping on HARP. Okay, again, you can connect with us at www.harpnow.org or across social media platforms, Facebook, IG, Twitter, YouTube included, okay, at harpnow.org. That's HARPNOWORG. Okay, that's what's up. And so with that, as you guys may know, from the announcements, for the PSAs, this week's topic is what? Yes, trans visibility in harassment and assault. Yes, that is a very important topic. Hello. Okay, we talk about everything here, as long as it deals with harassment, as long as it deals with assault, as long as it deals with anything across the spectrum of abuse. It is so very important to destigmatize it and really take back our power in how we deal with, how we, eliminate and hopefully, see ourselves to a future that without harassment or assault. And one of the things we have to talk about is the issues that are very particular to our folks within the trans community, folks of trans experiences. And so, as I was doing my research, I found across some interesting stats and facts, right? As we know, every literally this is a daily problem. It's a daily issue where folks of trans lived experiences and gender nonconforming folks, they tend to bear the brunt of a lot of the social and economic stigmatization. Yes, there's an economic factor to this too. It's not just like, oh, it's a social issue. No. There's financial repercussions associated with the stigma, with the marginalization that comes with, being, non-gender conforming or being trans or anything that's perceived as out of the norm, right? There are not only social but economic factors as well. And so in 2008, the National Center for Transgender Equality and the National LGBTQ Task Force formed a groundbreaking research partnership to address this issue. Okay. And this was the first comprehensive national transgender discrimination study that was done. And out of this study, 63% of the participants stated that they experienced serious acts of discrimination. Okay. And these had obviously not only emotional, but again, financial implications. And those participants, stated that they had experienced job loss due to some sort of bias, eviction, school bullying or harassment, and, teacher bullying as well, physical assault due to that bias, and at times even sexual assault. Yes, it happens, sexual harassment included in there, right? Some physical assault or, homelessness due to because of that gender identity or expression. Also loss of relationships with partners or, with their family members. Also denial of medical service. Yeah. And, and for some even, the extent of incarceration, right? And the implications of that, where if somebody's misgendered and put into an environment that actually makes it unsafe for them to either serve out their sentence or wait out up to their pretrial processing. And so, again, I'm trying to give you guys high level, but like I really thrive on allowing people to come here to share their stories because again, I can't speak for my trans folks. I cannot, I recognize my privilege in some spaces, and I recognize when it is not for me to speak on. I can support, but it's important to know when somebody else should have the floor. And so with that, it is my honor and my pleasure and my joy to welcome Josie Caballero. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I am well, and welcome to HARP. Welcome to the HARP platform. Actually, for those of you who don't know, today Josie is streaming on her Twitch, and we're here on the Facebook Live, which will be posted also on IG and across our social media platforms. So come on through with it. If you can, take a couple seconds, introduce yourself to the people, all the good stuff before we get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very excited to be here. As you said, my name is Josie Rose Caballero. She,
Yeah.
her pronouns, yes.
Mhm.
And I am streaming on Twitch. I do that as a hobby. So I really appreciate Hart for letting me do it. I know that the birds on
Absolutely.
my side are very happy. You can find me on twitch.tv/Josie Rose C. So that's like the letter C. So thank you so much for the introduction. I guess I'll give you what I do right now. I am the
Yes.
project manager for the National Center for Transgender Equality, where I run the U.S. Transgender Survey, which is basically the third iteration of what you just described, which is the National Trans Discrimination Survey, which then later evolved into the U.S. Transgender Survey that we ran in 2015. And I have the distinct honor and pleasure to be working and managing the U.S. Transgender Survey for 2022. So excited to have a conversation. Let's do it.
Ah, like first of all, if pause. If you can tell, I get really excited like when my guests show up and show out. Like personally, like for me, that's when I fangirl. Like I really love seeing my fellow folks just in whatever industry you happen to be in. I love when people just shine in their spaces, in your respective spaces, because it says something. It says something about the passion with which you bring who you are to what you do, because what we do absolutely affects how people live their daily lives. And I know even for me as a fellow in STEM, like sometimes that really gets lost in the process. People forget that the research we do, the plans that we approve, the things that the built environments that we create, literally when all is said and done, it affects people, people's very real lived experiences. And when we don't include, especially the marginalized, and I'll be very clear, the intentionally marginalized people, all right, at those decision making tables, at those planning, at those policy revision tables, when we don't include them, um use how things are is what happens, because it's built in, right? These systems of inefficiencies are then built in to whatever that final output looks like, right? Again, quick plug for Coded Bias. They're not paying me, but it's like one of those things I was like, no duh, right?
Yeah.
I was like, of course you're gonna like the coding in any program, in any like invention, tends to carry, right, then the bias of the creator,
Yeah.
right? And then we oftentimes don't really like notice it because it is inbuilt in us. And it does take oftentimes like an outside party to be like, hey, have you considered XYZ? Have you maybe considered thinking about it like this? And then you're like, oh, I didn't even notice that. I didn't even think about it like that. So what's your take on that? Like kind of what has been your experience, especially navigating through the surveys, through hopefully, as you've mentioned even before, just interacting with different people throughout your journey. Like, what has that been like? Navigating. Because for me, like again, because we kind of met in this nexus of transportation
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
Trans-survey. And one of the things I'm really big on is like intersectionality in transport research. And so one of my big issues now is like transiting, like transit. Like, what are those issues like? And especially when you look at it from the umbrella of harassment or assault in general, like what are those experiences like in your
So I guess for the clarity of the question, are you saying like are you specifically asking about transit, or are you just talking about like
I mean,
the
you can take it in general, and then you can
yeah,
definitely veer
are
into
you
just the transit. But I do want to also take the bigger picture of, you know even outside of just transit, like these are the general experiences that we oftentimes don't get to hear, in
yeah,
the context of harassment or assault, because people are
for
people are familiar
sure.
with domestic violence, people are familiar with child abuse or
Sure.
workplace harassment, but like when you then begin to ask them, okay, then let's think of the non-binary or the
Yeah,
non-traditional context.
sure.
How does that express differently? Or like what is something that we wouldn't, like, folks of
So the
the
way that
general,
yeah,
what would they
so the
not think of?
Yeah, so the thing I like to do is because I'm a super data nerd, researcher here. So I like to go off with some of the numbers,
Yes.
that because like we have such a rich information source with the U.S. Transgender Survey that we actually have quantitative data to actually look at
Mm.
and actually give you solid numbers on what those harassments look like.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
as far as harassment, so the U.S.
Yeah.
Transgender Survey had almost 28,000 transgender respondents, which is the largest transgender survey in the world. So we actually have a very rich idea of how the trans experience actually looks like in that way. So nearly half, 46% of the respondents were verbally harassed in the past year for being trans. Nearly 1 in 10 respondents were physically attacked in the past year because of them being trans. Nearly half, 47% of respondents were sexually assaulted at some point in their lifetime. 1 in 10 were sexually assaulted in the past year. And then the respondents that actually were involved in sex work, 71% of those experienced houselessness, and 67% of people with disabilities were more likely to have been sexually assaulted in their lifetime. So if you're disabled, if you have a disability and you're trans, you're more than half, 65% likely to actually be sexually assaulted in your lifetime. And more than half, 54%, experience some form of intimate partner violence, including acts of coercion, control, and physical harm. And nearly one quarter have experienced severe physical violence in an intimate partnership, compared to 18% of the US population. So the reason I wanted to kind of like bring that up is that not only is it a perceived violence that exists, that it's like one of those things where we're like, yeah, trans people, it must suck to be trans because you have all these things to deal with. But this is
Mm.
hard evidence that being a
Yes.
trans person in the United States is you're almost half as likely to be verbally accosted at the least in the like within a year period of time. So every
Mm.
year you have a 50% chance at some point you're going to be
Wow.
yelled at for being trans. And then the assault in 1 in 10, which is just beyond terrible. So when you look at the intersectionalities of all the other
Wow.
things that are involved, if you're black and trans, if you're a person of color and trans, if you're indigenous and
Yes.
trans, those numbers go up sometimes 2 to 3 times more than the average American population. So
Yes.
so this is a very real threat. This is trans rights are under attack, and so are trans people. In fact, we lose a Pulse nightclub amount of people every year of Black trans women that are murdered in this country. So we still have a lot of work to do, because right now only 80% of Americans have actually ever met a trans person in real life. So people we're still a mystery to a lot of people. The only image that people have of a trans person are the things that they've seen on media, TV, and all of those things. So it's a very broad thing, and yeah, it's not great right now. It's getting better, and the work that we're doing is making things better, and bringing a light to these issues is extremely important, but we still have a long way to go. Oh, you're on mute.
Yo,
Yep, there
you,
you go.
you,
Mhm.
you again, this is the reason I stay on mute is because I am like, again, I've come to know myself and told when you're such an affirming person, I'm like, yes, because I'm like,
Oh,
because I I'm so glad, like, I'm glad. See, this is why I like to keep it general at first, because you touch on some very key things that I really hope people don't miss. The fact that we see these compounded risk factors, right? Where, first of all, I'm glad that there is data to back up this anecdotal lived experience. Because too often, people are like, especially when we go back and talk about policies, where they're like, well, if we were supposed to change it, we need the data to see it, right? But I'm like, you need to prioritize actually collecting this data so that you can have good data so that it can show you, okay, this is where the gap is, or you know what? it only substantiates the real lived experiences of those people who are suffering, right? And we need to see that across the board. And I'm glad that we're finally beginning to see kind of more funding in like some really key needed areas for research in areas people have been saying this is inequitable, this is a risk factor, this is unfair, like, hey, this is important to study, whether we're, as you said, whether we're talking about, those folks of people of color, Black people, trans people lived experiences, like homelessness, and really, like, at this point, if for those of our research folks out there and our funders out there, please understand that the years of getting basic data, I muted myself there, of getting basic data is, it needs to be stopped, because what we really need is this intersectionality rich data that really takes into account the complexity of the way people navigate this built environment, right? The way I navigate as a, obviously female presenting a Black woman is very different than a white woman, or than a trans person, or a trans woman, or a trans man, or a man, or a cis man would navigate. Or even, like, even let's say, like, for people who may clearly present as either being on the queer spectrum versus someone who's perceived as heterosexual, it's very different, right? So anytime you present differently, right, people who are uncomfortable with that, they get triggered, and then they end up displacing that feeling back on you, right? When the reality, that's their own problem. That's your problem to deal. It's not my
Yeah.
problem, girl. And so, yeah, that's how I'm so glad you touched on these key risk factors, where, it's one thing, if we just look at it as under the umbrella of trans, but even as we begin to, like, break it down, right, to these other factors that really can make it a life or death issue for some people, right? Do you have the support needed, to navigate, life, while trying to live your truth? Are you unhoused?
Right.
Do you have a significant other, and how do they feel about that? What was that journey to that? Because we have also seen some startling statistics on folks dealing with domestic partner related issues, or if they've gone out on a date. And even within the last year, I read news of at least one person, if it wasn't two separate instances, somebody who was, you know
It's
terminated
fine.
out of their
Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
simply because of that context. you
Yeah.
know and
Absolutely.
these are the realities that we really must face. We
And
have to call it out.
yeah, and when we're talking about data, one of the things that people don't even think about is, like, when we report when a trans person is murdered, or
Yeah.
a lot of times the police departments will go by their ID when they gender them in the report, so they
Yeah.
don't have to say that they're a trans person, so they don't have
Right.
to say that this was possibly a hate crime.
Okay.
And yeah, so there's, like, even issues in the discrepancies of how a report these violent acts as well. So it makes it harder for us to know where the most pervasive dangers are for the people in
Yes.
question. So it's tragic. And that's why, like, ID laws and things like that need to happen, because all of a sudden you have an ID that has your old
Hmm.
gender marker, and then the police will interact with you different.
Yes.
Prison systems interact with you different.
Talk about
um
it.
yeah, and like, just normal humans, like, all of a sudden, like, and going back to the transit piece, because we were at that point a second ago.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
somebody presenting, and let's say, somebody says, hey, I need to see your ID, and then you
Yes.
present your ID, and now it's different. Now you're more exposed to that
Yeah.
harassment.
Yeah.
Because I'll even say this with identity documents,
Yeah.
that nearly one-third of respondents, 32%,
Hmm.
who've shown an ID with their name and gender that doesn't match their gender presentation, were verbally harassed, denied benefits or services, or asked to leave and or assaulted. So like, just the equity of being seen as the person that you
Mm.
are. is a something that will provide you safety, because
Absolutely.
like there's so many ways we are put into danger, and
Mm,
we have to do what we can to protect ourselves, and that's why we got to fight for policies. And
mhm,
these policies are extremely important when we talk about IDs. 15 years ago, there wasn't even a gender neutral marker. Now we in 11 states we have gender neutral markers. So within
mhm,
7 years time, we've made big strides and big differences. So and it's nice that we actually have some policies that are starting to help, like passports are now easier to receive
yes,
if you're trans. That
mm,
is a huge deal because you used to have to
yes,
give basically your life story to say that yes, I am trans. You need doctors, you need all these things just to be able to like travel with the
mm,
identity documents that you prefer. Because if you're in another country, you don't know what the laws are like over there. You go into
mm,
another country and you have the wrong passport. Well, now you're
yes,
really asking for trouble in a lot of places too. So those type of things are just like the levels of just the microaggressions of an organization that won't let you change your name without having to provide so much information to make that possible. For example,
mm,
myself, like with the Veterans Administration, I'm a veteran. So
yes,
with the Veterans Administration, I still have my old name on all the records because they've made me dance through so many hoops to change the
mm,
name. And now I have to like go to this obscure office in this obscure part of the county to go in with
mhm,
all my documents for an office that's open a few hours a day during the middle of the effing workday. So I haven't had a chance to go over to it. Rather than me being able to mail them documents, scan documents, send an email with documents, they require me to physically go and do this work. And it's frustrating to have to be dead named every time that I go into my medical doctor's office, right? And it's like
oh,
it's like come on, like obviously, like this that you're wrong when you say that name,
mm,
but it's still a form of a microaggression in a sense when the documentation doesn't match the identity and gender that you are.
fact,
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to highlight that piece because there's so many slices of a trans person's life that can lead them to be assaulted or abused. Another thing is economic factors. The fact that the unemployment rate for trans identified folks. And by the way, what I'm reading is the U.S. Transgender Executive Summary. You can find this on ustranssurvey.org. And this basically is all your really top line information. The survey itself is actually giant, as you can see with all this rich data that is in here. It's quite thick. So we have an executive summary to help people understand the top line stuff. But as far as economic concerns, because all of these are connected, we're talking about like the 10,000-foot view of like interconnectedness and rights and approval. So in the United States, nearly one third are living in trans people are living in poverty more than twice the U.S. population, and the unemployment rate amongst respondents was 3 times higher than the unemployment rate of the United States back when this survey was taken. And then if you go into Middle Eastern people, 35%, Latino, Latinx people, 21%, Black, 20%, indigenous, 23%, and so multiracial, 22%. And what I'm saying, more likely to be unemployed. Well, guess what happens when that happens? You immediately the people have to go into the underground economy, right? So then they're exposed to sex
yes,
work, right? And so a lot of
let's get into
trans,
it, yes,
yeah, so a lot of the trans people in the United States have to deal with the underground economy. So 1 in 5 people have participated in the underground economy at some point, for income at some point in their lives, including 12% that did it sex work in exchange for income, and 9% that did it in the past year, with higher rates among women of color. And then you also have the higher rates of HIV prevalence because of that. And then you have the obvious violence that is respondents for that. So if you are in the underground economy, respondents who interacted with the police while doing sex work or while the police mistakenly thought they were doing sex work report high rates of police harassment, abuse, and mistreatment. Nearly 9 out of 10, 86% reported being harassed, attacked, sexually assaulted, or mistreated in some way by the police. And so that is a serious issue. So the interconnectivity of all of these things, and then if you don't have income, then you're most likely to be unhoused, right? And then there's like so many intersections that lead to levels of harassment. So like nearly
Yeah.
one quarter of respondents had experienced some form of housing discrimination in the past year or two. So not
Yeah.
only do you have the fact that it's harder to get money and you're more likely to be in poverty, you're
Yeah.
also a quarter more likely to be denied some form of housing assistance because of your trans status, forcing those people to the streets, forcing them into the underground economy, forcing them into another world of harassment and abuse, and by the hands of police or by the people who are using the services of the sex work. And so that is so many things that are involved with this entire ecosystem of violence that
Yeah.
exist for trans people. So when you
Yeah.
start putting all of these puzzle pieces together, it's no wonder we have so many trans women being murdered in this country. It's no wonder that the suicidality of a child is 9 times more likely than their cis peers, because they
Yeah.
see the world burning around their ears, and then they see, well, how am I going to come out as trans as a child when adults can't even have the dignity of respect in life?
Oh.
So there's so many of those things that exist. Yeah, I know it's heavy topics.
Yeah.
Ah,
like so, can we go back and look and just like unpack
yeah,
a couple of things in
yeah.
there? Because
A lot of food for thought
come on,
there.
yes. First of all, I'm really glad that you came correct with the data. Thank you. I appreciate that. But also, I appreciate the context in which you are building around these issues that people oftentimes look at as just very superficial issues. Oh, they don't have a place to live. Okay, that's on them. Oh, they can't go to a doctor. Why don't they just use their old ID? You can't do this. Oh, why don't you just get this job? And I'm also grateful that you were comfortable enough to address the underground work, the underground economy that sometimes folks have to get into, not by choice. In
Yeah,
most cases, because we understand
yeah.
currently it is illegal here in the US. It's like, sure, there are countries outside of here that have legalized sex work, but
Mhm.
the reality is, for a lot of people who happen to find themselves in that space, it is not their choice.
No.
And what happens to them, being the being the folks who then are on the front line of it, really, their interactions with law enforcement is very different than, because they can't be like, oh no, I am being pimped out, if that's the case,
Right.
because they're the ones who've been caught and they're being put in through the system. All
Yeah.
right, and then maybe their ID is not in alignment with how they present, so then they end up being put in an even worse situation, right? And so it really brings up these layers of, holy wow, this is so messed up on so many levels, right? Like, and for me, I'm really stuck on the issue of how policy and how law enforcement especially treats folks who happen to find themselves in a very tough situation in life.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
there is a very interesting power play that happens there, where
Mhm.
somebody clearly needs assistance. And instead of you actually helping them, you're putting them in a far worse situation. Whether you're putting them in a jail, or you're sending them to prison, or like they're racking up a record, and you're not seeing, like, hold up, this is a pattern. Something is going on here. How about let's address that?
Yeah.
If it is homelessness that's forcing somebody to have to go into these underground economies, let's address that. if it's funding for medical services that, or food, literally something as simple as food. If it literally, like, if at the end of the day you literally cannot afford food, you will do whatever you need. Like, that's the, to me, I'm like, that's logic. That's human survival mode.
Right. Right. It is. And we blame the victim.
Yes, instead of the system.
Yeah, instead of the system that put those people in that position in the first place. And, when you see that 1 in 5 trans people participated in some form of underground economy, sex work or sex work, like
Yeah.
because of income. And then
Yes.
when you go in and you see that, people of color are 22 to 35% more likely to be unemployed or be in poverty, so it's like you can see all of these connections that are very, very real. Now, we have done some things where policy changes where this current administration cracked down on making sure that trans people are no longer discriminated against in housing.
Mm-hmm.
Where they're actually the housing and urban development department in the White House had
Yeah.
deleted or got rid of the memo and set out a new memo that Trump put out previously, which was basically saying if there's a person that's trans, deny them services. Like, they actually put out a memo saying if you see stubble, if you see an Adam's apple, like, then don't do it. Like seriously teaching the caseworkers how to clock a trans person to deny them services to shelter. Like, that was something that the previous administration did. Now, thankfully, that is now over, and now there's new guidelines that say you can't do that anymore. That's illegal. But the fact is, that was literally 2020.
It was like, I
Like,
was gonna say, I was like, but that was like literally like a
yeah.
year ago.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and we're just getting to the point right now where it's like, hey, that maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. It was just recently, again, we're allowing trans gender troops back in the military. We're allowing veterans to transition through the VA, including surgery starting next year. Which is a huge deal.
Mm.
And we are doing everything we can to, like, so there's I'm trying to think of another policy that's happened. I already talked about the passports. But then you also have, on the opposite side, all the discrimination and bills that are coming in from the states, anti-sports, trans athlete bans, medical bans for minors that are dealing with transgender healthcare, segregation during for bathrooms and businesses that allow trans organizations in Tennessee. Luckily, a judge struck that down. To Texas actually considering redefining their child abuse laws to include gender affirming care as a form of child abuse. So the state of Texas is actually considering taking children away from their parents for allowing them to transition to be the gender that they are, including putting doctors in prison for the crime of child abuse. So these are the things that are happening right now, while on the other hand, we're trying to create policy and help us. There's an entire outside network of conservatives, I'm just going to say it, Republicans in the United States, that have used trans women as a scapegoat to throw under the bus for them to allow them to block the Equality Act. And the Equality Act in the United States doesn't just protect trans identities. It protects people on gender as well, and sexual orientation, as well as strengthening the 1964 Civil Rights Act to broaden the protections of race as well. So I always say this because historically,
Mhm.
trans and particularly trans women, when it comes to, like, gay rights, and it comes to, like, equality rights, it's always the trans people in the front that are always the ones that are the first ones to get the baton cracked across their head by the authorities. And it's been the march of trans people in front, getting rights for gay people, getting rights for a lot of humans on this planet. And here we are again with trans rights rights being in the forefront and that being the final step to get equality for everybody. So if anybody ever, if you hear the word trans rights or human rights, it's more correct than it's ever been in United States history, because as soon as we grant human rights to trans people, we get the
Mm.
Equality Act, and guess what? Everybody's equality is better for it. So that's how important trans rights are, because it doesn't just help me as a trans woman over here, it
Okay.
helps you as a Black woman too, right?
And to me, again, this is screaming Stonewall all over again. Like people will literally just gloss over Stonewall and what happened, and I'm like, a Black trans woman who like was like, "F this, we're done,"
Yeah, yeah.
and
Martha
I'm
P.
like, and
Johnson.
that's and so for me, and you stated something that I say often across various topics, in which is when you address the needs of the most marginalized of you, everybody else above that actually wins. It takes nothing from the rest of those who are in privilege. It only adds you more privilege in a way.
Yeah,
Like, at the
exactly.
very least, it gives the most marginalized their basic human rights. And I do mean basic human
Yeah,
rights. But for everybody else, they get extra.
extra protection.
And for me, so at the end of the day, for me, I'm always like, I feel like something is being taken away from you. And again, I'm talking to my folks who tend to be privileged. You know who
Yeah,
you are. You know, like it's like, what does it take from you to allow a trans person to live out their life?
right, right.
What does it take away from you to allow a Black person, a woman? Cause the other thing, because that you mentioned when you said the was it the conservatives tend to use trans women to either block
Yeah,
policies or something like that.
to
Can you
block the Equality Act.
yeah, can you please unpack that a little bit for the folks
Yeah,
to
for
understand
sure.
what that means? Yeah.
Right now, we are closer that we've ever been in history of passing the Equality Act. We've been trying to pass this for 40 years in this country, and we still haven't been able to do so. Now, we are close because we are only 10 Republican senators away from passing the Equality Act in the United States, which is a huge, huge deal. So, what they have decided for their ability to say this Equality Act is bad, and they're using especially trans women in particular, trans teenagers, really. There's two arguments that they use. One is to protect women's sports. So they're saying that, oh, there's unfair advantages. So you're going to have these cis girls get crushed by these trans girls, and it's not going to be fair. And they try to play this safety card, or they try to say, oh, we don't want to put, trans women in women prisons. They don't want to, they don't want to put like trans women in women's shelters, and all of those type of things. They try to say it's protecting women, which kind of says what, like trans women are predators. And then you also have the fact that like you're talking about high school kids and nobody's super strong, and these are the same people who say you can't have puberty blockers either. So not only are they saying you
Hard.
can't have puberty blockers, they also are saying, oh, because you're not on puberty blockers and you're going through male puberty, you're not allowed to go and play with the girls team, which you're just talking about high school kids. But so it's like a self-defeating argument. So, and it's always funny to me. It's like, oh, now you care about women's sports? Like, really? Like,
Oh,
yeah,
the last time they watched women's sports.
yeah,
When
yeah,
was the last time
exactly.
they showed any care towards women's sports? I mean, women, female athletes are still being paid a fraction of their male
Oh, yeah,
counterparts. So tell
absolutely,
me again how you
absolutely.
care.
Yeah, exactly.
In the topic of sports, I mean, we saw recently with the Olympics when with the Semenyas and the rest of them who are born female and just happen to have hormonal levels that apparently are higher than whatever that
Yeah, normal
level, the
cis
cutoff.
woman.
But I'm like,
Mhm.
right? So now I find it really hypocritical. Like on the
Yeah,
one hand, you want to ban trans folks, but on the other hand, you also want to ban cis women
yeah,
because of what?
yeah. Pretty soon
You
they're just gonna
think
have
that
a
you
height
think they're
requirement.
meant
It's like, if you're higher than 6 foot tall in the basketball, it's unfair. Like you just can't
right?
play anymore. Like,
It's
it's it. Yeah, it makes no sense. So it's a complete BS argument, and their second argument is a religious freedom argument, which means is this: they want the right to discriminate against trans people because it's their right religiously to be able to discriminate. And let me explain what that means to them. So a religious, and this is actually information that was shared by a conservative religious scholar at the Senate hearing for the Equality Act earlier this
Mhm,
year. She said that
mhm,
religious organization, this particular Catholic religious organization she was talking about, saves about 20,000 lives of humans because of like food insecurity, houselessness, and all that type of stuff. And she literally made the argument that if those churches and those religious organizations are forced to serve trans people, they'll just shutter their doors and they'll just stop providing services for people because their right to not to discriminate against trans women is more important than their benevolence of the actual people they're trying to protect and serve. So if you're a church, if you have like a church community group or whatever that's open to
mhm,
the public, and let's say it's like a basketball like tournament for the community with kids, a
mhm,
religious organization feels that if they're forced to allow a trans person to be in that public community space that they have, then
mhm.
that is a violation of their religious freedoms to discriminate against people that they don't feel should exist. And that is literally their argument. So that's the two major arguments that they're making to block the Equality Act. Not because it's better for everybody, not because of all these things. It's because religious organizations want to openly discriminate against trans people. Now, the thing that pisses me off about that whole thing is that I know a lot of religious people, and I know a lot of them that would be disgusted to know that there are other Christian organizations blocking trans people from being able to get basic human rights in a soup line.
Basic.
And it's like you're talking about churches putting people in soup lines, and the church is like, nope, if there's going to be a trans person in this line and if the government tells me I have to do it, shut the soup line down. We don't need to give people anything. And it's like, well, I thought you were in this for like the love of mankind. Like, what
Like,
is this about?
what God, again, no offense, please, no offense
Yeah.
to all my God loving people, but like, if your God requires you to hate on somebody that badly, it in the name of said God, so that you do not actually end up serving the rest of those who are hungry, homeless,
Yeah.
or in need, then I would strongly suggest revisiting who that God is.
Yeah, exactly,
That's just
exactly.
where I
And
stand.
and and a lot of times too, it's like, it's really frustrating because there are so many, kind-hearted religious people that don't care, but there are these few isolated groups that make everybody look bad, that make
That
that
part.
that 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 make it less likely for a trans person to be even religious. Like if they really care about like apostolizing and like having
Right.
more membership in churches, the last thing you're gonna do is like, oh, we practice hate here. Like, oh, who's gonna want to be a part of that?
Okay.
It's like you're destroying your own religion from the inside because you're literally telling people who would be members to get the f out and die.
Literally, like family. Like seriously. I mean, but then again, let's be honest. Those also tend to be the same sect of people who over the decades, over the years, had some problem with some other marginalized group. Whether it was we do not allow gays in here, we don't bake cake for gays, or oh no, we don't think black people should be in the same congregation with us. You can't drink from the same water fountain as us, or oh, they're not even human, right?
Right.
So we see this pattern of like always needing to find a group to marginalize,
Yeah, absolutely.
and that
Always.
is a reality.
Yeah,
And
it
I'm
is.
like, family out there, if you're watching, if you know somebody with these problematic views, I ask that we be better. I sincerely ask that we be better, not only for ourselves, but for the rest of the community.
Yeah.
Please and thank you.
Yeah,
Because it's
absolutely.
2021. And for us to still be stigmatizing people simply because of the way they look or the way they choose to express the fullness of who they are, whether that's at work, at home, in our religious or spiritual spaces, right? Like if we choose to allow the stigmatization to go on, please remember, I call it the racism or oppression roulette. It'll come back and it'll be back to your turn. And at that point, you'll be like, somebody else please stand up for me.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
who
Exactly.
had to do that then? When you have
Exactly.
sat there and watched as everybody else got kicked off the bus, got annihilated off the bus, what will you then do then when you were the last one left and like in this oppression bus? How you doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like that's
Yeah.
craziness to me.
And what's interesting about that, it's like it would be the Equality Act that would be the thing that protects them. Right? And that's really what it comes down to is like they're literally fighting against the thing that will give them protection in the future from further digress or regress, you know?
And also the other interesting part is especially when I see again my fellow white women, I'm gonna call you out. When we see folks who are in a contextual position of privilege, sisters involved, but oftentimes it's white women who are really expressing their position of power here. Y'all tend to vote against your own best interest. Look at the last election, last couple of elections. Folks were clearly voting against their best interest.
Yeah.
And to me, it's really saddening because on the one hand, you're like, oh yeah, it's gonna keep that person away from it. I was like, you chop off your own nose. For
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
For what?
Exactly.
Like, what does it gain you? Right? I
Exactly.
mean,
It's
I was if it's a, and then for me the worst part is like to automatically associate somebody's just expression to deviance because let's call it what it is.
yeah,
They're automatically
exactly.
associating it to deviancy. But I'm like,
Mhm.
straight cis het men can absolutely and have been doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
Your brothers, your uncles, your whoever's straight, cis, heterosexual, God fearing men have been doing that, have been doing those deviant acts also in the name of God.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And
So,
it's pick and choosing, it's cherry picking what they see as deviant. It's like the idea of like seeing a trans person in their eye line is like a form of abuse to them. Like I've literally like you know how I put my she her pronouns in my name here and I do that quite
yeah.
often. Um I've literally had somebody and I do Twitch streaming as a hobby and my people on my side can attest to it, but I've
Okay.
had people get upset because I had my pronouns in my name. Like because they literally would get triggered like a white conservative man would get triggered because it's like, oh well, you're just a snowflake lib because you have your pronouns in your bio. I'm like, no, I'm just doing that because it's easier. Like, you know what I
Like,
mean? It's like, I'm sorry that I offended you so much. It's like the idea and what his excuse was is like you're forcing it down my throat. I'm like, what? Like, what am I doing? I'm just like in the space, right? It's like and that's the real that's the crux of the hatred, right? That's the crux of the bigotry. It's the existence in the space that is an affront to their own comfortability. So you can't win with certain people.
yes.
That's why bigotry is so dangerous because
Hmm.
it's not about, you know, you
Yes.
interacting with that person. It's your own existence that
Ooh.
makes them boil. It's the fact that we even exist in the space at all that makes them feel assaulted by our presence. And
Mm.
that's why they project away and project at you and say that
Yes.
you're disgusting and like trying to like and the like the most I'm talking about the worst bigots of all people who
Mm.
will like misgender you on purpose because
Yes.
in their head if they can do that then there's still some sense of normalcy in their own heads that if they
Yes.
can say oh wait this is just somebody I'm going to say it's this so I can feel more comfortable in the space. regardless of how the other person feels over there, right? Like, and that's the thing, and like, and I'm going to get on a little bit of a tangent here. I always find it very rich. I find it very
Uh-huh.
rich when when the like I will just say the snowflake Republicans,
Mhm.
when they get so offended
Yes.
by like a lefty saying something about, oh, this isn't right, or like they talk about cancellation, right? They talk about
Mhm.
cancellation and they're afraid that the left is going to cancel them. They're just afraid that what they've been doing to us for entire humanity is going to happen to them. They have been canceling trans people. They have been canceling Black people. They have been canceling so many marginalized communities as for breakfast. That's what they do, and that's what
And
they have
annihilated.
done. Exactly. And now they're afraid that we're going to be the ones that say, no, you get out of this space because you disgust me. And they're afraid that everything that they've been doing to the other people is now
Mm.
coming back at them. But they don't understand that we're not like that. We're accepting, we're
We're not built
loving.
like that. We're not
Yeah,
like that though. Step
exactly.
one.
But they're so afraid that their cancellation is next because they've been doing it the entire time as a part of a system.
Ooh. Oh, and I'm glad you called it out as a part of the system. There's a particular system that has perpetuated and continues to perpetuate this level of bigotry and hatred
Yeah.
for certain marginalized group. And it is about time. It is August 2021. It is. It's out August 2021. And to me, Miss Winnie O, I would truly believe that it is high time that we like stop this mess. Don't just literally let people live.
Yeah.
Call out the and that's the thing. We oftentimes try to soften it as it's bias, it's implicit. No. It's hatred, it's bigotry, it is racism, it is sexism, it's all the isms that people are afraid to call it out for what it is that allows folks to continue being cocooned in the safety of their bigotry.
Yeah.
And that's not okay.
Yeah.
Not
Exactly.
in 2021, not in 2020
Yeah.
when it was legalized. It is not okay.
Yeah. It's
It
not.
is not
It's not.
okay.
Nope, it's
You
not.
know.
And so yeah. Now
Huh.
I know you are coming close
Yeah.
to the end of your
Yeah.
hour. So
Yeah.
I will, yeah, so I will whatever you need to do now. I
Right. No, I was like, I just again, like, this is what happens, and we always get into it. Like, it's crazy. But please do come back.
Oh,
Please
I
do.
want
I
to.
enjoyed this thoroughly. This is
Yeah.
awesome. Clearly, there's a lot more to unpack because we didn't even talk about how police may mistakenly think somebody was doing sex work.
Oh
I was
yeah,
like,
that's a thing. That's an absolute thing. Walking while trans, it's a crime. Right?
please.
Like you're walking, you're looking cute walking down walking from a club, and all of a sudden you're walking down an alley, and then all of a sudden a cop pulls you over. It's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I was like, I'm just
I'm
here, like
walking.
I'm walking,
I'm
and it's like,
existing.
yeah, existing. And then all of a sudden they try to clock you as a trans sex worker, and then all of a sudden you're getting slammed against the car. Like that happens to especially black trans women, especially black trans women.
Mm,
Because there's, I mean, we could talk
mm.
about this for another hour of the intersections that
Come back,
exist on that,
please. Please.
because you also have the fact that black trans women don't have access to healthcare as often.
Yes.
So therefore they can't get the medicines that they need to not be as to help them feminize. So they're
Yes.
not as clockable. But the fact of the matter is, because black trans women don't have that access to that healthcare, then they're more vulnerable because they're more visibly trans in areas that are more
Mhm.
dangerous to be visibly trans.
Mm.
So I mean, the layers of assault and harassment on this just keep going up and up and up. Mhm.
Josie, thank you. Let me just say a huge, first of all, thank you for taking the
Yeah.
time out of your very busy schedule life to share just this very important topic with us. Because again, to me, I truly believe this is part of the conversations that we really do need to bring out of our secret places of like, oh, well, we'll talk
Yeah.
about it in this space. Like, to me, the topics that I bring up, I know they're uncomfortable, but also I love the fact that I tend to bring guests who are comfortable in their own skin and comfortable discussing these topics, because we need to.
Yeah.
They're important. If we're going to be able to make policy changes, if we're going to be able to have very candid, logical conversations about these topics, we need to address them. We
Yeah.
must address them. We can no longer, just look at them as there's this taboo thing they're going to talk about over there. Come meet me over
Yeah.
there. No, it's again, I can say it again, it's 2021. Bring it out.
Yeah.
Call it out. Because people are tired. We are tired. I'm tired. I'm tired. We're tired. We're all tired. All of us
Yeah.
marginalized people are tired. We're tired of living on the fringes of society, being forced to go operate over there. Because why? Because you're making me uncomfortable.
That's
And
right.
for so long, marginalized demographics have been forced to be uncomfortable, right? While those of dominant culture are allowed to continue in that comfort while you continue to suffer and possibly die.
Yeah.
And that's not okay.
No.
And so, as we close out, I just want to give you a minute. Also, if you have any last words, any plugs
Yeah.
for what you got going on, please let the people know before we close out.
Absolutely. So, all of you
Yes.
that are here, you can find me on doing conversations like this on twitch.tv/Josie Rose C. Excuse me. Wow, I'm coughing. Worst time possible. But I also invite all of you to also visit transequality.org and take a look at we have a state action center, so you can actually look state by state and see where all the transphobic bills are and where we are on that map. You can also look at the wonderful reports that I have here. Ustranssurvey.org is completely publicly available. You can download them, use them, cite them, use them in your research, use them in your arguments, use them in your work. People across the country have been doing so. And hopefully in October, if you are a trans identified individual and you're listening now, stay tuned, because we're going to be releasing the pledge in October to actually take the US Transgender survey in February. Your voice
Yes.
matters. We want to hear it. We want to hear what you have to say, because your experience makes another trans experience better. And that's what we need to make sure that you tell your story. Let us know what it's like to be trans in America.
Yeah. Oh, that is. Thank you again. Please, Josie, pin me when you are sending out the reminder for October, so I'll let folks know,
Yeah.
because that is so important. I am. If you also notice, we do have surveys on HARP, but again, right now the focus is on the trans survey coming up in October. We'll send out a reminder. So please, if you're trans and you're out there, or you know somebody who's trans and is unaware of this survey coming up, please let them know. Share this link with them and let them know that it is just as important to share your story, because your story absolutely matters. Because we are more than just a data point somewhere. Your story is what helps build the narrative of what that data point looks like for the next person, and what the policies that come out of these data points that happens to be us, whatever our experiences are, that matters in the storytelling. And so I encourage you guys out there, do stay connected. If you're picking up what I'm putting down here at HARP, please do connect with us at www.harpnow.org, or across our social media platforms at harpnow.org. That's h.a.r.p. HARPNOWORG, fam. Connect, okay? Please do. It's on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, as well as Twitter.
Yeah. You need to
And
jump on
then,
Twitch. You jump on
I know,
Twitch and
yeah.
you have
I know,
open
apparently,
conversations. I mean, everybody's doing it now. Everybody's doing it. It's what the cool kids do.
Josie must be on Twitch too, so maybe soon enough it might be on Twitch. I don't know.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. You get it's good stuff.
Absolutely. And listen, I'm gonna have to find out, because I'm still very much like just trying to get used to this streaming situation. But
Oh
again,
gosh.
family,
Yeah.
please take care of yourselves out there. Be well, be safe, and in all you do, be encouraged, fam.
Bye.